Okay, great. So with that, we'll move on to our learning objectives for today. Our 2 objectives are to be able to identify 2 chemicals of concern in Michigan fish and be able to identify 2 adverse health effects related to consuming fish higher in chemicals. And with that, I'm going to be turning it over to our presenter for today, Laura Gasho, with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. And Laura, you're currently on mute if you are speaking.
Can you hear me?
Oh, perfect. There you are. Great. Yes,
Okay,
and we can see your screen.
Good deal. Winning all the way around. Okay. So thank you guys so much for joining today. I know when we talk about health and when we talk about different issues, a lot of times we don't talk about fish, which is funny because for a lot of people it can be a really important part of the diet, and there can be some great health benefits, but we also know that there are some really important health risks that go along with eating fish. So that's what we're talking about today. As Mara mentioned, I'm part of the Eat Safe Fish team at the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. I'm a health educator with this program, and I'm also a registered nurse with experience in public health. So my objectives today, Mara covered a couple of them, but that we know the main chemicals of concern in Michigan fish, are aware of the sources of those chemicals of concern, know the health risks of eating fish higher in chemicals, and understand a little bit how to use our Eat Safe Fish materials. So that's kind of where we're going today. So the first thing is, why eat fish? And even if you yourself might be allergic to fish or something like that, or have some other reason not to, a lot of times clients will eat fish, so it's worth considering. Good reasons to eat fish: they're a great lean source of protein, they're low in saturated fat, certain species of fish are high in omega-3 fatty acids, and for many Michigan residents, fish can be a local and affordable food source. So omega-3 fatty acids, they're essential fatty acids that are found in some plants and fish. Our bodies do not produce enough of them, so it's essential that we must consume them. There are other food items, including some plants, that do have omega-3 fatty acids. Fish tend to be a very high source, in some species. So omega-3s have some importance. Research shows that these fatty acids may provide benefits to a number of body systems, including the brain, nervous system, and eye development in babies and children. Brain and eyes. The Mayo Clinic says that omega-3s may reduce inflammation in the body, and inflammation can damage blood vessels and lead to heart disease. The American Heart Association says that eating fish high in omega-3s may help to prevent heart disease in adults. Omega-3s may lower triglycerides, lower blood pressure, and reduce blood clotting, which are all great things for heart health. And the Mayo Clinic also indicates that omega-3s may help to improve rheumatoid arthritis symptoms. If you want to know more about omega-3 fatty acids, I'll just point to a couple different sources. The Mayo Clinic talks about more of those benefits. University of Maryland Medical Center has a page detailing foods that are rich in omega-3 fatty acids. And the National Institutes of Health has kind of like 7 important things to know about omega-3 fatty acids. So we've kind of reviewed the health benefits of fish, but to get those benefits, we have to avoid those known and preventable risks. And those risks come to us from chemicals found in the environment that end up in our fish. So now we're going to talk more about those chemicals. This graphic depicts the nature of persistent chemicals. So notice that the factories picture here are releasing chemicals into the air that then settle in the water. This is kind of representative of the situation circa 1970s. And then in the second graphic, more representative of the situation today, factories are not pumping out chemicals to the same degree that they were before, but some chemicals are still being released and some still remain in the air and water. And our air and water may look clean, or at least cleaner than it did maybe in the 1970s, but these chemicals are not obvious. We can't see or smell them, and they're still persisting in our environment because they don't break down easily. It is important to know that our federal and state regulations have reduced the amount of some chemicals that are released, but since the chemicals are persistent, many remain in the air, water, and soil. So the other thing we talk about a lot with these chemicals is that they're bioaccumulative, so building up in living things. There are a lot of ways that chemicals end up in our waters, including wind, rain, runoff. They then sink to the bottom of the lake or river and settle into the sediment. Small creatures called macroinvertebrates eat these chemicals as they dig in the sediment for food. These macroinvertebrates get eaten by minnows, minnows by medium fish by large fish. On up the food chain we go, and each of those is collecting and storing some of these chemicals in their body. And so this explains why our larger fish, predator fish, bottom feeders, and our longer living fish are likely to have more chemicals in their bodies than do smaller, younger fish. So this matters because sometimes we eat food too, or eat fish rather. So with each serving of fish consumed, the chemicals are accumulating in our bodies as well. Now eventually our bodies will get rid of these chemicals, but some can stay for a long period of time. Different chemicals stick around for various lengths of time in our bodies, and they may potentially increase the risk of developing some diseases. Now one meal may have amounts of chemicals that are not concerning by themselves, but those chemicals accumulate with every serving of fish consumed. So it's important to be making good choices about the types of fish we're going to eat. And these chemicals accumulate throughout the lifespan and affect people of all age groups and sizes. Some people are at higher risk, though, including women and men of reproductive age, infants, the elderly, and those with existing health conditions. And the Eat Safe Fish guidelines, we'll get into that a bit later, are health protective for all groups. All right, so people have created various chemicals for industry, farm, home use. They've been introduced into our environment in a lot of different ways depending on their production, use, and disposal. Through research, we've linked some of these chemicals to adverse health effects. We're going to briefly look at 5 chemical types that are high on our list of chemicals of concern that we find in our Michigan fish. The potential, as well as the potential adverse health effects that may be associated with exposure to these chemicals. These 3 you see here, PCBs, mercury, and dioxins, are the ones that drive most of our advisories through the state. On the next slide, we'll talk about a couple others, but just so you know, this is, these 3 are definitely very important in our guidelines. So first off, PCBs. These were used in electrical equipment and found in hydraulic oils. They are linked to the development of cancer and diabetes. The immune system can be harmed, and brain development can be harmed in fetuses and children. Mercury is one that I'm sure all of you have heard about at one point in your life or another. We've talked about it a lot in the past. It's worth noting it's found in nearly all fish all over the world. This is not just a Michigan problem or a Great Lakes problem. And it is found in both freshwater and ocean fish. Mercury is primarily released into the air from smokestacks of coal-fired power plants and other industries. And while state and federal regulations have helped to reduce the amount of mercury in the environment, some is still released and some still remains from past years. It's important to know that potential health problems from mercury and other chemicals of concern do apply to everyone. This is not just a concern for women that are considering having children in the future. If you're looking at these potential issues, too much mercury in the body can lead to impaired brain development in fetuses and children. the immune system can be harmed, and heart function can be harmed in older adults. Also, federal agencies like the Food and Drug Administration and the Environmental Protection Agency provide public statements about choosing fish that are lower in mercury. When you're working with your clients and you're in your practice, we do want you to pay special attention to those who have pre-existing medical conditions or who eat meals with fish 1 or more times a month, especially when we talk about mercury and how that accumulates in the body. Dioxins, these are created when chlorine chemicals are made or used, so they're not created on purpose. They've been linked to the development of cancer, fertility can be harmed, and thyroid function can be harmed. Okay, a couple more chemicals of concern. So DDT, this was one of the first modern insecticides. Its use in the U.S. was banned in 1972, but we still find it in some of our fish today. It has been linked to the development of cancer and diabetes. And perfluorooctane sulfonate, or PFOS, is used for waterproofing clothes, in firefighting foams, papers and packing, cleaning products, and pesticides. It is now rarely used in the U.S. Thyroid function can be harmed, and brain development can be harmed in fetuses and children with too much exposure, to PFOS. Okay, so as I list off all those very concerning health conditions or adverse health effects, I do want you to remember that the risk of developing any of these diseases depends on several factors, some that can be controlled, some that cannot. People generally can't control their age, pre-existing health conditions, genetics, but people can control the type of fish they eat, how often they eat fish, and how much their serving size is, which will help them to limit their exposure to the chemicals found in fish. There is no way to know if an individual's health problems are caused by the chemicals in fish directly. People can only decrease their known risk factors. And that's why we talk about, because again, the things we can change here, we can do quite a bit with changing our diet and knowing what kinds of fish to choose. And therefore try to reduce some of our known risk factors. And this is kind of a graphic depiction of risk. So people of all ages can be at higher risk for developing certain health conditions from exposure to these chemicals. This shows how the health risks cross the lifespan from birth through adulthood. The figures shaded in green here represent those who are more susceptible to developing disease during that stage of life. So we do have our youngest population and our oldest population that are at highest risk for developing disease. But people in the middle can be affected as well. Whether a person has adverse health effects depends on many risk factors, with age being just one of them. Another risk factor is existing medical conditions. So health risks do increase based on the presence of other conditions, such as diabetes, cancer, heart issues, things that impair metabolism or organ systems could be an issue. So the Eat Safe Fish program. This was created by Michigan Department of Health and Human Services to help Michigan residents to make informed choices about the fish they eat. It was created by a team of toxicologists and health educators. And lest you think this is something new and novel, our first advisory was issued in 1970, and that was for mercury in the St. Clair River. So we've been around in some capacity for a while. Adding the health education component and creating materials that make the advisories and the guidance easier to use has been a more recent addition to the program, but in some capacity there's been advisories and concerns around fish for a long time here in Michigan. So what we're going to do here in a little bit is walk through a few of our materials, both so that to share the information with you and also to help you become familiar with the materials yourself so that you might consider using them, if not in your practice, at least with family and friends. But before we do that, we're going to talk about the My Serving. This is a concept that's incorporated into all of our Eat Safe Fish materials. And the My Serving is a portion size of fish scaled to the consumer's body weight that represents the safe amount of fish that a person can eat during the month or year and not get exposed to harmful amounts of chemicals. So it's not a recommendation in reference to calories, to any particular nutrient, but rather it's a measurement tool to calculate or to determine how many My Servings are in a person's meal. Since the My Servings is based on weight, it can be customizable for any client, and each person in a family might have a different My Serving. And of course, meals are not the same as My Servings. Some people may choose to have more than one My Serving in a meal. Some people may choose to have less than one. The main objectives are for people to recognize how much their My Serving is and then keep track of how much they consume, even if it's more or less than one My Serving in a setting. So I kind of equate this to like my consumption of ice cream, and while the serving size may be a half a cup, I still eat more than that in a setting. But I can keep track of that and calculate, in that case it's calories. So here we'd be tracking the number of servings in reference to chemicals, but it's okay to eat more than one serving in a setting. So to calculate the My Serving, what you do is we use an adult's hand as kind of a reference point, but it is based on weight. So for a 180-pound adult, an 8-ounce serving, or about the size of an adult's hand, is a serving. For a 90-pound person, 4 ounces, or the size of an adult's palm, would be a serving. For a 45-pound person, 2 ounces, or the size of half an adult's palm, is a serving. If a person weighs more or less than the weights given, we can calculate to determine their appropriate serving size. For every 20 pounds more than the weights listed, add an ounce. For every 20 pounds less, subtract an ounce of fish. There may be individual circumstances such as obesity or other concerns that must be taken into account when giving nutritional advice. So in those instances, a smaller serving size or some other modification may be appropriate. The Eat Safe Fish guidelines are safe for women of reproductive age, pregnant women, breastfeeding women, and children. The only difference here is that for pregnant women, it's important to use the pre-pregnancy weight of the client to determine their My Serving size. All right, so we're going to talk through our 3 main educational materials. Each of these were created for a different audience. The Buy Safe Fish brochure is for clients who purchase and eat fish from restaurants and grocery stores. It covers mercury only. The Eat Safe Fish brochure is for clients who consume some fish caught in Michigan waters. It covers mercury along with other chemicals like PCBs and dioxins. Then we have the Eat Safe Fish guide, which is for clients who fish or eat fish frequently from Michigan waters. This guide has consumption guidance specific to water bodies and fish found around the state. Oh, I added an animation, who knew? Okay, so the Buy Safe Fish brochure is about fish purchased from restaurants and stores. However, if these fish are caught in Michigan or any of the Great Lakes, we want you to use our Eat Safe Fish guide or the safe fishing tips you'll find in the Eat Safe Fish brochure. And again, that's because this one just focuses on mercury, and we already talked about how we have other chemicals of concern in Michigan that sometimes drive our advisories before mercury would be a concern. So key messages in this brochure: mercury is found in nearly all fish from all over the world. Mercury is in our atmosphere, and it falls into our lakes, rivers, and oceans. The greatest amounts of mercury are released into the air by coal-fired power plants and other industrial practices. Mercury can't be removed from fish by cooking or cleaning. Mercury is found in the meat or the fillet of the fish, so that's the part of the fish that we would generally eat. And choosing fish lower in mercury is the only way to avoid getting too much. Eat8 is a tool inside this brochure that helps make that decision easy. So here we find the aforementioned Eat8 tool. So this is a planning tool for the month. It ranks fish with a point system based on their mercury content. So lower numbers indicate lower mercury levels, and the points are based on 1 My Serving. So if clients eat 8 points or less per month, they will be within safe mercury levels. I want to call your attention to a couple things here. So you see some of the fish have a little fish with a heart icon next to them. Those are indicating fish that are higher in omega-3 fatty acids. So you'll see in our 1-point box, which is going to be lower mercury, fish like anchovies, salmon are going to be great choices because you're not only getting those benefits of omega-3s, but you're also getting very low mercury levels. So that's a good thing. The other icon we have is the little Michigan Met. So this indicates that the person using this should check the Eat Safe Fish guide if the fish was caught from Michigan waters. And again, that's because we have those other chemicals of concern at play. One thing I want to point out here, people often freak out when they see tuna in the 4-point box. Tuna tends to be a very popular fish that people might eat a couple times a week even. One thing I like to show is that if we go to a canned light tuna, that cuts our mercury in half. That moves us to the 2-point box. So if you're a tuna lover or you know someone who is, that can be a really easy way to take a step to reduce health risks while still enjoying a favorite meal or snack. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the Eat Safe Fish brochure. Key messages here, fish can be part of a healthy diet, but you should carefully choose the fish you eat, especially if you eat a lot of fish. Some chemicals can be removed from fish, some cannot. PCBs and dioxins are stored in the fat of the fish, while mercury is stored in the meat of the fish, the part of the fish that we eat. Larger fish, predator fish, and fish that eat directly from the bottom tend to have more chemicals in their bodies. And the chemicals do tend to build up in the food chain. The water won't necessarily look dirty. Many chemicals have settled on the bottom of the lake or river, and you can still swim in lakes and rivers with fish consumption guidelines or use them for other recreational purposes, unless the local health department has issued a temporary water quality advisory. And people who eat a lot of fish should use the Eat Safe Fish guide. We'll get to that in a bit, but that's really the best way to choose fish that are safe to eat. And this information is applicable to individuals of all ages, and the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services fish consumption guidelines, as we talked about, are set to be safe for fetuses, children, and individuals with existing health conditions. The brochure also contains reasonable advice for anyone who wants to avoid getting too much of these chemicals in their bodies. And again, by limiting exposure to these chemicals, an individual will also limit the chance of health problems related to these chemicals. Inside the brochure, the Eat Safe Fish brochure, we find our 3 C's, choose, clean, and cook. So the first C is choose. So if we're making an informed choice about what fish to eat, we can reduce exposure to the chemicals. So people will start out with a few short true or false statements about their current lifestyle. If all responses are true, then they can use, we can assume they're at lower risk from chemicals in fish, and they can follow the safe tips. Well, there's the quiz, which is on the left for choosing fish to eat. If one or more of those responses are false, they might be at higher risk and should use the Eat Safe Fish guide, which has information specific to fish in certain water bodies across the state. Our second C is clean. So once clients have chosen fish that are lower in amounts of chemicals, they can move on to the second C, clean. This step explains cutting away visible fat and removing organs. Careful cleaning can remove some of the PCBs and dioxins found in fish. And the final C is cook. Even after choosing safer fish and cleaning them properly, chemicals still remain. Fish should be cooked on a grate or grill so that additional fat can drip off. So that's an important thing. One thing I like to note here too, we find sometimes that people that enjoy fried fish, if we're cooking it in a deep fryer, we want to make sure we're getting rid of that oil, if we're frying the fish, we want to get rid of that oil after we cook the fish. And that's because these PCBs and dioxins that are stored in the fat are going to move into that oil as they cook. So then the next thing we fry would get, if we are using like a deep fryer or something, would, maybe have your fried broccoli with a side of PCBs, which is not ideal. So we want people to get rid of the oil after they're cooking fish. So we encourage pan frying if they're going to do that, because people tend to be more willing to get rid of that little bit of oil versus an entire deep fryer worth of oil, which can be expensive. And remember, we cannot get rid of mercury from fish by cleaning or cooking, so we always have to choose our fish wisely. The Eat Safe Fish Guide is for people that frequently eat locally caught fish. The guidelines can help you make an informed choice when choosing and eating fish caught in Michigan waters. The guide is broken into 5 regions of the state, which you'll see shortly. Key messages from the Eat Safe Fish Guide are that fish in the Eat Safe Fish Guide have been tested. The consumption guidelines published in the guide are based on laboratory testing of fish fillets or steaks only. The guidelines are health protective of everyone. So again, we talked about those special populations or more sensitive populations that can still use this guide without concern. And the guidelines are based on current science. If you are a fisher person or an angler, you may recall older advisories that looked really complicated with lots of circles and diamonds and triangles, but we don't do that anymore. We've updated our science and managed to make things a lot simpler to explain to folks. And the Eat Safe Fish guidelines are recommendations. Our guidelines are not laws. They do not have to be followed. Also, they do not impact what's available for sale, for instance, at the restaurant or grocery store. However, there are real health benefits to following these guidelines. So let's explore this Eat Safe Fish Guide. Okay, so here's the map. So you can see how we've broken it into 5 different regions, and that's simply a pragmatic move because generally people they have a fishing area or maybe a couple spots they go to fish, but usually they don't fish the entire state. So it made things a little easier for us to package and for them to get to relevant information. So within the guide, every county is laid out the same way. So basically, I picked one that bordered Lake Michigan. Our Great Lakes are in the front of the books. Or if you pull up the PDF on our website, they're towards the beginning. But they're all laid out the same. I picked Ottawa County just because it had all the things I wanted to show you. But you can see that we start with a map. And this is just to make sure that as anglers are referring to it, that we all know we're talking about the same water body. Different fish species are listed within each lake, and those are the fish species that we've tested for that water body. In the rightmost column, you'll see the number of my servings per month that are recommended for that type of fish. You can see here with the Crockery Lake, the largemouth bass is even split based on the size of it. Next to some fish, you'll see a little fish with a hook, and those are indicating best choice fish for that water body. So those tend to be fish that you could eat at least 8 my servings per month. Some fish have limited listed in the my servings per month column. What limited means is that only healthy adults that are not planning on having children the next several years should eat those fish, and then only once or twice a year. People who are in those more sensitive populations, so children, women that are pregnant, men and women that are, women that are pregnant or breastfeeding, men and women that are planning on having children in the next several years, and people with chronic health conditions should not be eating those fish. And that's because they have a pretty high chemical content. Other fish you'll see have a do not eat in that column, and that's a strict do not eat recommendation for everyone. Those fish have really high amounts of chemicals, and we don't want anyone to eat them. I put a little yellow circle towards the top there in the northern pike. You'll see a little 2X, and that's indicating that if we are carefully following the 3 C's that choose, clean, cook we talked about earlier, we can safely double the number of servings per month. So if we're always cutting away fat and then grilling or cooking on a grate, we can safely go up to 4 servings then of northern pike under 30 inches if we choose to. So that's one thing to note as well. So remember, Eat Safe Fish Guide, not regulatory, but it is advisory. The information is provided to those that are interested in and concerned about making safe fish choices. And the guide is free by request through our toll-free number and on our website. And all of our materials that you've seen today are available that way as well. I should note both our Eat Safe Fish brochure and Buy Safe Fish brochure are available not just in English, but also in Spanish, Arabic, Vietnamese, Chinese, and Hmong. We try to make it as accessible as possible. All of our educational materials can also be found at our website, and they all work reasonably well on mobile devices. All of our materials can be ordered for free. We are happy to provide them to you in either small or large quantities, whatever you can use. Within our website, a couple of spots I want to point you to. Our Reports and Science page has the science behind the fish advisories. So if you really want to deep dive into why it's 6 servings per month for this fish, you can find that. If you really want to dive into the literature behind why we have set the recommendations we do or the levels we do for certain chemicals, that's there. If you really get into it too, you're welcome to call our toxicologist, and they would be more than happy to talk it over with you. So that's one good thing to look at there. The other thing, our provider page. This is a good place to go to order our materials. Also, I do want to mention that we have a webinar there. This is a free webinar, and it's good for a continuing education credit for nurses and dietitians. And it does cover some of the same information we talked about today, some of those same basics. It goes a little deeper into walking through those materials, and it also has some different client scenarios that might be of value to you. So just something to mention. So I do want to talk about a variety of activities that we do throughout the state to try to share Eat Safe Fish messaging and materials. So we attend events and talk to people directly. That's one big thing we do. Another thing is our Areas of Concern program. So there are EPA designated areas of concern throughout the state of Michigan. So these are areas that are designated that have significant impairment of beneficial uses such as recreational or economic use. We work with those that have issues related to chemicals in fish or contaminants in fish. So we tend to do a lot of direct outreach in those communities and working with different partner agencies within those communities as well. We have signs in some popular fishing areas throughout the state to try to get this message out to anglers that way. This one happens to be in the Detroit River. And we also have an outreach program to healthcare providers specifically. So we attend healthcare conferences and set up our booths. It looks a lot like this most of the time, and provide presentations to healthcare providers. Doing this type of work requires a lot of partners. So I want to mention some of those. So the Environmental Protection Agency. So these folks do a lot of amazing work. They do a lot of cleanup and research. They also provide us with grants through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. At Areas of Concern, like we mentioned in the last slide, public advisory committees, or PACs. These are community stakeholders who work to advise state and federal agencies on the issues in those areas and work to improve the area. Healthcare providers distribute our materials and get it out to a far wider audience than we could do alone. For testing of fish, we rely heavily on the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality and the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. Wayne State University has been another partner in our work, and they work with our Detroit Riverwalker program in the past. We'll talk about that in a moment. And they've also done important work on surveys of shoreline anglers, among other research efforts in the Detroit area. Okay, so as kind of a way to show you kind of what our work looks like in an actual community, hopefully to make it a little more clear to you. I want to focus on Detroit for a little bit. So I'm going to walk you through a biomonitoring project that we did in the Detroit area a couple years ago, talk about fish advisories specific to the Detroit area, and current outreach that we do specifically for Detroit. So our biomonitoring project, this study took place between 2013 and 2014. It included urban shoreline anglers who said that they ate at least 2 meals of locally caught fish per month. We focused on urban shoreline anglers for a few reasons. First of all, other work we've done, other research studies show that higher consumption of most contaminated fish, that we see higher consumption of the most contaminated fish among our low-income, lower-educated, and minority populations. And these groups tend to fish from the shore rather than from boats. This group also tends to have lower awareness of fish consumption guidelines. That may be possible, lack of information access. There were some years there where all we had was information available online, which wasn't super accessible. But that's part of why we chose to specifically look at this group. We did attempt to do this at both Detroit and Saginaw Bay City area, but we got such a small sample from the Saginaw area that we are only using the Detroit results here. From those anglers, we did collect blood and urine samples, as well as have them answer or sit through a questionnaire interview, looking at demographics, fish eating patterns, and other possible sources of chemical exposure. Participants received $75 Visa gift card and a thank you for participating in the study. And we did provide cab transportation for those with transportation needs. Test results were mailed to all participants. As we get into the results, doing a quick disclaimer, this is our MDHHS analysis of the data, and other agencies, including federal agencies, may do additional analyses or provide different interpretations. Oops. Whoa. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so demographics here. So race demographic is similar to Detroit area demographics. However, we can't make that direct comparison between our data and U.S. Census data because our categories were not the same as census categories. So here we see we have about 11% of our sample was white, 82% of our participants were Black or African American, 7% identified as other, and 1% refused. Oh geez, sorry, there must be something weird going on here. Household income, you can see here, we had about almost an equal split between those that said they have a household income less than $25,000 and those that said they made between $25,000 to less than $75,000. 10% indicated they made $75,000 or more, and 11% refused or did not know. And I'm sure we're going to go through this weird animation again here. Sorry in advance. Yep. Okay. Finally, education. 18% indicated they had less than a high school graduation or GED. 35% indicated that they had at least high school graduation or GED. 29% indicated they had attended some college, no degree. And 18% indicated they had a college degree of some kind. Okay, so from all of that work and from our wonderful participants, we learned that mercury levels of Detroit study participants ages 20 and older were about 2.5 times higher than most people of similar age in the U.S. PCB levels of Detroit study participants were 2 to 4 times higher than people of similar age in the U.S., and dioxin levels of Detroit study participants were about the same as most people of similar age in the U.S. So again, we did compare this to CDC's National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey and Haines, and basically that kind of gives us an understanding of what is a normal range of chemicals across the U.S. population. we can't tell from these results the risks of health effects or disease. All we can understand is that our Detroit participants have higher levels of these chemicals in their bodies. And so that's important, and that really encourages us to continue going in our work and to continue trying to provide that outreach to the Detroit population. So this is the Detroit River. We did do venue-based sampling along the Detroit River to gather our sample for the Detroit biomonitoring project. So you'll see here some of the different fish there, and there's a lot of fish that are limited. These circle the fish that you can eat in larger amounts. And we do want to encourage anglers that are fishing the Detroit River to target those types of fish that have less restrictive guidelines. Our outreach in the Detroit area, since 2008, we've had updated fish contaminant data. We've installed signs along the Detroit River from Mariner Park all the way to Bulls Harbor. From 2010 to 2016, we had our River Walker program going, and what that was we had two gentlemen that are residents in the Detroit area that were, and they're pictured here on the right, Robert and Jim, and they walked along the riverfront and talked to anglers and engaged with them, sharing Eat Safe Fish materials, sharing our messaging, and talking to them about it. We distributed Detroit area brochures, or do distribute rather. We attend health fairs and other events, provide our materials to anyone who wants to share them, especially in the Detroit area. We also do outreach, and we talked about how I do outreach statewide to healthcare providers and provide those materials at no cost and training. We do especially put in a special effort, I would say, to the Detroit area to try to encourage clinics in that area, especially federally qualified health centers that serve a more low-income population, to talk about these messages to their clients. These are some of the materials we've designed or created especially for the Detroit area. So the guide, of course, signs, a brochure that's specific to the Detroit area, our Detroit area pocket reference, which is very like visual heavy rather than text heavy, information about fish advisories, and then our Train the Trainer for Eat Safe Fish materials that we tailored specifically to the Detroit area. So to wrap this up, I want to make sure you guys know fish can be a healthy addition to everyone's diet. The chemicals in fish tend to be bioaccumulative, persistent, and toxic. Chemicals consumed from fish can be reduced by following the Eat Safe Fish guidelines, and Michigan Department of Health and Human Services is a helpful resource for questions related to eating safe fish. Lastly, a list of references used to create this presentation, and that is my contact information. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you all learned something new, and I look forward to your questions. And Mara, you can take control back should you want it.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. And like she mentioned, we are opening it up for questions at this time. So if folks want to chat any of those out, or if you just want to raise your hand, I can unmute you and you can ask your question that way as well.
Hi, Laura. This is Becca. I have a question. So one of the chemicals that you listed was PFAS, and there's been some recent news about different perfluorinated chemicals contaminating drinking water, and I also know in certain areas like around Oscoda there's fish advisories there. So I wondered if you might say a few words about that.
Absolutely. So yes, there are concerns related to perfluorinated chemicals in the Pascoda area, and that is both for drinking water as well as for fish advisories in that area. Especially there's a water body called Clark's Marsh there that has like extraordinarily high levels of perfluorinated in the fish there, as well as in the water itself. What we find as far as the fish bioaccumulating is that the PFOS, or the perfluorooctane sulfonate, tends to accumulate. What we know so far is that that seems to accumulate the most in fish compared to the other perfluorinated chemicals. And the contamination there is related to the AFFF foam, which is a firefighting foam that was used by the Air Force there at the former Wirt Smith Air Force Base when it was in operation. So that's related to the Escoda area and that site. Did you have any other specific angle of that I didn't address, Becca?
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering because, we've been reading about some contamination in drinking water elsewhere in the state and in other places as well when we talk to our colleagues. And so I'm wondering, when you do testing for fish, are you looking for sort of all of the chemicals on the list? Are you looking for certain ones that have already been identified because of or emerging contaminants? I'm wondering a bit more about how you select or look for those.
Sure. Our toxicologist could tell you more about how we pick that, but I'll do my best. So we do test for like a standard suite of some chemicals based on what we know about them potentially affecting human health. There are things that we know are probably in fish that we know don't, or that we're aware don't affect human health. So those aren't things. So things like I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but regardless, there are things that may accumulate in like fish livers or something that aren't going to affect human health, especially the part of the fish that we consume.
Yeah.
So we don't test for those. We do test different areas depending on not just how heavily they're used recreationally, but also what we know about their historical contamination. So we did testing on the fish in the Escoda area because we knew that when we found out about the potential contamination of perfluorinated in the water. So that triggered or led to our additional testing there.
Okay. And do you know, are there, and maybe this is something that we can just reach back out to your toxicologist, like if there are other areas now because of data coming out on PFOS and other perfluorinated chemicals showing up in drinking water, if those are if there are other areas of the state, for example, where there'll be a more concentrated testing for those chemicals?
Mm-hmm. I think we will be doing additional testing excuse me, I can't speak, for perfluorinated chemicals at a couple areas around the state. I couldn't tell you exactly which ones, but if you want to, you have my contact information. If you want to send me your information, I'm happy to connect you with our toxicologist, or if you want to call that 1-800 number and ask for that, they'll get you directly there.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I have another question, and maybe the answer is the same, but what if, we have our health fellows come from all over the state, and what do citizens do if they feel like there's a particular reason to be concerned about a toxic chemical that, again, they know is bioaccumulative, or that they've read about showing up in fish? Like, would health professionals or other scientists and experts, would they reach out to the toxicologists at Department of Health and Human Services? Like, how does that conversation work back and forth?
So a lot of times, a lot of client questions can be addressed with just looking at our guidelines. You can look at, your particular body of water and look at the type of fish and address, okay, we know it's safe to eat this much. So we can talk about that. If somebody's concerned about an emerging contaminant or something like that, or thinks that perhaps there's a contamination issue at their area that we've not tested for or something like that, they could certainly contact us, and we can take that into account when we're sending in a request for the next year's DEQ sampling of fish.
Terrific.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're going to do a last quick call for questions. I'm not seeing any at the moment, so if someone's typing something right now, I'll just thank Laura again so much for her time and for presenting to all of us. And Laura, like you mentioned, your contact information is up on the screen, so if folks do have questions, can they reach out to you directly?
Yes, I encourage it.
Great, perfect. Well, thanks again so much for joining us today, Laura. And like Laura said, if any of you do have any questions after today's webinar, you can reach out to Laura.
Thank you.
All right, and with that, we're going to switch over to some other actions besides just using the Eat Safe Fish guidelines and ensuring that the fish that you are consuming, you're doing it in the proper manner. We are going to be looking at some of the different actions that the Ecology Center is doing, but also some of the ways in which all of you can get involved in some of this work. So just for starters, the Ecology Center, we are an active proponent of healthy fish consumption and persuaded the state of Michigan to expand its distribution of fish advisories back in 1998, and we continue to work for a safe food supply and reduce pollution in the Great Lakes. So one of the ways in which we do this is through the closing of waste incinerators. We worked with other organizations to shut down all of Michigan's 157 medical waste incinerators, one of the largest contributors to dioxin in the environment. You might recall that Laura did mention dioxin throughout her presentation. So included in those medical waste incinerators were the Henry Ford Hospital Detroit's and Hamtramck's medical waste incinerators. One of the current campaigns that's going on is the Breathe Free Detroit campaign. We are a current partner in that, and that is working to shut down Detroit's municipal waste incinerator. Here's one of the photos used by the Breathe Free Detroit campaign, and if you have questions about what the folks involved in this campaign are currently doing, and you want to learn more about how to get involved, we can put you in contact with our Detroit Community Health Director, Catherine Savoy, who you'll remember from our Food 101 presentation, and Melissa Sargent, our Green Living Resources Director. So another way that we are involved in this work is through cleaner and safer products. Ecology Center, we advocate for cleaner and safer consumer products on store shelves. Two of the most commonly used PBDEs, Penta BDE and Octa BDE, are now banned in the state of Michigan thanks to the work of the Ecology Center and other organizations that were working on this. And we continue to work to reduce the use of new emerging hazardous flame retardants in consumer products, including one of our current campaigns, which is calling for the elimination of flame retardants from children's car seats. And I know we have Lauren and Becca on the phone. Do either of you have anything else that you would like to say about our work pertaining to healthier stuff?
This is Lauren,
Sure.
I sent the Health Fellows last night an email about our Change.org petition. I just checked it, and we are up to over 31,000 supporters, so that's great. This is probably the largest petition that Healthy Stuff has done in a while, and so we'd love your support in signing that petition, and also feel free to forward that email to your friends and colleagues. We are asking Graco, which was one of the largest manufacturers of children's car seats, to eliminate toxic flame retardants from their seats. And so we think this is an important ask, and I hope that you'll consider helping us out with this petition. Let me know if you have any questions. You can respond to that email directly.
This is Becca. I want to back up really quickly to the PBDs and other flame retardants. Folks might remember when we had Dr. Tracy Woodruff present to us for the Toxics 201. She really focused on these chemicals. They're polybrominated diphenyl ethers. And as Mara said, we worked to ban penta and octa-BDE, I think it was in 2004, and continued to try at the state level to ban through the state legislature DECA-BDE. Those chemicals have largely been phased out now due to voluntary federal actions, but never actually banned. And I will note that some of those legacy toxic flame retardants are actually starting to show up again in some consumer products. And so there is this issue that that we really do need to make sure we're banning things, that the voluntary action can be useful. But in the end, until we slam the door shut on these chemicals, they will continue to end up in products, come out in household dust or through the waste stream and end up in the environment. So these chemicals in particular, these flame retardant chemicals, have been found in every fish that was sampled by a Grand Valley State University study. Oh, it's a few years back, and we have some information that we could share with you about that. And they were finding PBD chemicals in fish, and so that's why it's listed here. Even though I don't think there are advisories for PBDEs at the state level, it is something that's a concern. Folks may remember that when Dr. Woodruff was talking about these PBDEs, she was showing information about the neurotoxic effects of them and how their neurotoxicity is actually pretty much on the level with that of lead. So we're looking at, unfortunately, the new lead. Now the market is moving away from these, and there are a lot of different state laws that have banned them, but we're moving from one thing to the other. So the Car Seat campaign that Lauren was talking a bit more about it builds on that, and that we keep going through this toxic whack-a-mole of moving from one toxic chemical to the other. So we need your help as fellows to continue working with us on both the market actions that can move things more quickly and move leaders in the field, and then to slam the door on toxic chemicals with the policy actions at the state and the federal level. I will be honest that it's a real challenge to get things through our state legislature right now and through Congress. So we are doubling down on focusing on local efforts and market efforts right now, and building up the momentum we need to pass better policy in the future. So, thanks, Mara.
Great. Thank you, Becca and Lauren. And lastly, one other piece of our work is related to transitioning to cleaner energy. So as Laura mentioned in her presentation, coal-fired power plants that produce our electricity are one of the main sources of mercury emissions in our air, water, and soil. And we know that mercury pollution is common in Michigan's waterways. So the Ecology Center, our work has a lot to do with this transition to cleaner sources of energy. And we work in a few different coalitions, including the Michigan Energy, Michigan Jobs, and Michigan Air, Michigan Health coalitions, to stop the construction and expansion of coal-fired power plants in Michigan, but also calling for their closure and moving towards renewable, cleaner, and efficient sources of energy. As you'll remember from our Climate and Energy 101 presentation and from our Lansing Day, Michigan has made progress in the last year by passing Public Acts 341 and 342 that increase our renewable energy standard from 10% to 15% by 2021, and it kept Michigan's energy efficiency standard at 1% per year. Now, this legislation went into effect back in April, and later this summer and into the fall, the Michigan Public Service Commission will be asking for public comments regarding the implementation of this new legislation, so please stay tuned for ways in which you can get involved in this effort. Lastly, you may remember on Lansing Day that Alexis mentioned new energy bills that were going to be introduced. Well, they have been. It actually happened the very next day by Democrats in both the Senate and the House. The bills proposed new renewable energy standards and energy efficiency standards. So they would require 50% of our energy to come from renewable sources by 2035 and increase our energy efficiency standard to 2% in the year 2022. And here's a photo of the bill sponsors at a press conference that was held. In the photo, we have Senators Hopgood and Warren and Representatives Lozinski and Hoadley. While we do not see these bills gaining large support, Becca mentioned that right now the state legislature is a little tough to get anything pushed forward in. So we don't see anything moving forward this year, but it would still be beneficial to contact your state legislators and show your support for stronger renewable, clean, and efficient energy sources. So with that, we'll open it up for any questions about different actions that you can take or things that the Ecology Center is working on. If anyone has anything they'd like to learn a little bit more information about currently. All right, and I'm not seeing any questions right now, but if you do have any questions in the future, you obviously know that you can always reach out to any of us. We'll be more than happy to either answer your questions or get you in contact with someone who can help you with whatever question it is that you have. So with that, we're going to move on to our evaluation. Your input and your feedback is really important to us. It helps us improve our webinars and our different presentations that we have for all of you, and it always helps us get a better sense of what other things that all of you would like to hear more about. So you can see the evaluation up on the screen. I'm also chatting it out. I'll also be chatting it out and sending it out with the recording that I'll be sending out later today to all of you. And then lastly, our next webinar was just scheduled, so we'll have our Campaign Planning 101 webinar on Tuesday, August 1st from 12 to 1 p.m. And our presenter for that will be our very own Lindsay Scalera. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining our webinar today. If you have any questions, you can always contact myself or anyone else here at the Ecology Center, and enjoy the rest of your day.